Hi everyone. Today I am going to show you everything that you need to know about making watercolored holiday wreaths. So I am going to show you how to make two different kinds of wreaths. One will make this type that is just, I guess, your traditional holiday wreath, all nice clean lines. And then I will also show you how to make a half blurred version as well. And that we're going to use a really loose watercolored style to make a wreath that half is in focus and half is a little blurred. And it's super easy to do. And here are just a couple of versions of what this style looks like. And I am also going to show you how to make each of the components of what makes a holiday wreath. So let's go ahead and get started with that. And we're going to start by making just a couple of nice little like Christmas tree type branches. And I'm going to use my sepia here, and I'm just going to draw a little curved line. That's going to be the stem. And then I'm going to draw these little tapered green lines on either side of our stem. And this is a really, really simple technique to do. It's super fun and relaxing. You could just go and just make, lots and lots of these leaves. It also makes a really nice background. If you're making a holiday card, you could just cover, a whole card panel with these little pine needle or Christmas tree type little branches. And it's really just this simple to do. You draw a line for the stem, right? Or the branch. And then you just draw these little pine needles just kind of coming out on a tapered diagonal on either side of the stem. And you can make it as simple or complicated as you like. The first version, we just have one layer of these little needles. For the second version, I went over it with a second layer, and so it gives it a little bit more of a full looking appearance there. We're going to move on to our next component. This is going to be a little branch of berries. And to make the branch, you just again draw a curved line, and then you're going to have these little wishbone shaped branches connecting to it. So you always want to make sure there's a little bit of a curve in the branches that you're adding onto your branch. It'll give it a real pretty, realistic look. If you just connected straight lines, it might look, just a little bit tight and not natural. So you always want to keep a little bit of a curve in your lines. And the shapes that I usually go for are just these little wishbone or Y-shaped branches. And you can have some little twigs also kind of just coming off of your larger branches. Just again, making those little V's or those little Y's there. And now we're going to start coloring in our berries. So the trick to make your berries pop is to leave a little white space either in the center or at the top of the berry. So what I'm doing is I'm just drawing a little circle with my red watercolor here and just being careful to leave a little dry spot in the center so that it looks like we have that little white shine, or maybe it's like the stem of the berry, the little part at the top there, but that will help to give a little bit of a pop, and then you won't have to go over your watercolor illustration later with a white gel pen or some white acrylic paint. So it's, good just to leave that little dry spot in the center. Just make it interesting. Now we're going to move to our third shape. So this is just a traditional leaf. So what I do is I make it in two strokes. So I make like a crescent shape on one side, and then I do the same on the other side. And I'm careful just to leave a little strip of white down the center where they connect. So let's do that again. So again, I just make that little like crescent shape on either side, and then I kind of fill it in until I just have that little white strip in the center. And we're going to make a little batch of 3 here. So I have our one in the center up a little higher than the others to the sides, and then I'm just going to add a little bit of indigo here to the base of the leaves just to let it bleed out and give a little bit of interest to the leaf so we get a couple different colors going on. And now we're going to attach our branch again using that sepia, and I'm just going to connect them together lightly. Going to connect this little guy too, and then maybe we'll draw a couple more leaves towards the bottom. I'm going to use some indigo here. So the colors that I'm using are cascade green, indigo, a little bit of cobalt, blue, turquoise, I think. And again, always using that same technique of making my leaf in two little motions with two little crescents, and then joining them until I just have a little sliver of white in the middle. And that little bit of white in the middle is going to give a lot of interest to your image. And because it's dry, the watercolor isn't going to seep in there. So even if you add a little bit of extra color like I'm doing here to the base, it won't cover in that little spot that you left dry. Okay, now we're going to do a really big not palm tree, pine needle branch. So I drew my curved line for the branch, and then I'm just going to attach some really long pine needles on either side and have them coming in at an angle. And this is really just a bigger version of those little Christmas tree branches that we did above, but this is a nice filler for your Christmas wreaths if you like, and it's also really, really quick to do because it's such a big image. And we're gonna just extend the branch a little bit, maybe add a couple of little knots towards the bottom, maybe darken up certain parts of the branch there just to make it interesting looking. Here are those little knots. They're just like little nubs on the edge of the branch. And then we're going to add another shade of green here, a deeper green, just to give this branch a little bit of depth. And you can do this, you can not do this. It's just another way to add some variation to your Christmas wreath elements. You could also just add the darker strokes to one side. So maybe it looks like part of the branch is highlighted, part is in shadow. You could just leave it all that same lighter green color, which I think was sap green that I used for the base of it. So just lots of fun ways to kind of play around with this depending on what look you're going for with your wreath. And now here I'm just adding some concentrated color like towards the bottom. Again, just playing around, trying to find what looks most interesting to me. Now we're going to make a pine cone. These are super fun and easy. So you're going to start with an upside down triangle. This is going to be the tip of the pine cone. And my little tip is a little bit dark, so I'm just going to take some of the paint away by just dipping my brush in with some clean water and trying to remove some of the paint. And now we're going to make another upside down triangle to the left and another upside down triangle to the right. And that's going to give us our first two layers of our pine cone. And then it's really just a matter of making those little upside down triangles until you get down to the base and just building out by one pine cone every layer. So the third layer is going to have these three little upside down triangles, and then the little guy in the middle might have a little bit of a different shape. It's just whatever shape you can fit into that little spot in the center. And then as I go down, I kind of just let my shapes get looser and looser, just trying to make that oval shape of the pine cone. So as we get towards the bottom, we're going to start getting more narrow. So that's where I for that last bottom layer there, it's just two little shapes. And by now they don't really look like triangles anymore. But this is the basic technique. So it's just like little shapes arranged like this with lots of white space in the middle, just to give the appearance of a pine cone. And then I'm going to add some little pine needles underneath him. So using that shape that we did to start our little branch, and then the little diagonal needles poking out from it. And then we're going to try another variation of a Christmas tree branch. So for this one, I'm going to make our little wishbone and then add a third branch here. And we're just going to do, it's kind of like, I guess, a cedar branch. So we're going to have some little needles sticking out from all three of these little sections here. And this is another nice little element to add to your trees, just so you have a variation of the flat leaves like those indigo and turquoise leaves that we did. You'll have pine cones, you'll have your little Christmas tree branches, you'll have this big pine branch you could do, and then you have this little combination of like a 3-leafed little Christmas tree branch, your little cedar branch. And with all these different elements, you should be able to make a real pretty Christmas wreath. Now we're going to do one last shape. This is kind of like a fern shape. And to start, this is going to just have a little teardrop leaf at the top, a little teardrop on either side of the branch. And then your teardrops are going to get just a little bit bigger as you go down. And you don't even have to connect these guys to the stem at this point. You could add in just a tiny little stem at the end, or you could just leave it white. Again, this is just to add another different shape to your wreaths, just so that you have lots of interesting things going on. All right, so let's put everything together. So I'm going to start by drawing a circle in the center of my Arches cold press watercolor block here. And I'm going to start with my sepia. So we're going to start with the branches. This is how I like to start my wreaths, and I just trace along the pencil line, and I'm just going to add my little branches on a curve. So when you add your little foliage pieces in, you do want to make sure that every branch has a little bit of a curve in it, so it's not just sticking straight up or straight to the side or straight down. You also might want to have your branch come up a little bit like I did and off the hand-drawn circle. By adding elements like that, that also will add some interest to your wreath. So again, if you just work, the key thing is to make sure that the shape of the wreath is clearly a circle. So you do want to follow this little line here, but every now and then you can go off the grid and have a branch sort of come out or away, but you do want to keep the overall like shape and proportion of this wreath. Another trick is to make sure your branches are all going in the same direction. So as you can see, they're all kind of going counterclockwise here. And another reason for me drawing in the branches to start is just so I remember that. Sometimes if I don't have those guides there, I might start putting leaves in all different directions, and it's harder to harmonize the different shapes if you have them going in different directions. But that's just my view. There are wreaths where you can have the leaves going in 2 different directions. But to start, I think this is a good way to start. And the first foliage I'm going to add to this leaf are those real pretty flat, like magnolia leaves, I guess, that we learned how to draw just a few moments ago. And I'm going to put them in groups of 3. So either groups of 3 or groups of 2. And I'm going to make sure that they're all pointed in a counterclockwise direction. I'm using some Cascade green here, and then a little bit of indigo at the base. I just think that gives it a real pretty, just blue-green shade to start with. For this little leaf here, I'm just using indigo. I'm using that method of making sure I leave that little strip of white in the center, just because it gives my leaf, it makes it real pretty and interesting to look at. And I'm going to draw another leaf to the side. I didn't quite hit the branch here, but that's okay. You can just draw in a little extension later on like I did there. So no worries there. This is, wreaths are very forgiving because you can just kind of cover over something if you don't like exactly the way that it came out, or you can add a filler, or just lots of options there. So now this is a little group of 2 that I've done here, or 2 little flat leaves. And I'm going to I think I'm going to end up with 4 little clusters. Normally, whatever element you're adding in, you want to add in odd number. It's just more visually appealing if you have like a group of 3 or 1 or 5 than if you have 2 or 4 or 6. I think the idea is that your brain will If there's a pair, it's going to focus on just the fact that there's a pair there, and it might look a little off to you. But if you have an uneven number of things, it gives your brain a rest, and it's not like searching for the pair. I don't know. I kind of just made that up, I think, but anyway, it just looks better to have odd numbers of elements when you add them. Okay, so I'm going to keep adding my little magnolia leaves here. Sometimes I connect them to the branches I've already laid down. Sometimes I might just put them in other spots. And if I do that, I just connect them with a new stem. It's all fine there. And now we can start adding in some of these little Christmas tree branches. So I'm just going to use the branches I already drew in and just add a little bit of, I think this is serpentine green here. It's a real pretty like yellow greenish gold color. And I'm just going to add my little diagonal needles on either side of the branch. And then we're going to add another one here. So one thing I found, I'm like, for this particular type, I like to have one on either side. Sometimes I like to stagger them. But for this one, I just thought it looked nice if there was another little pine branch exactly opposite to it on the inside of the wreath. Another thing that you want to make sure when you're making these wreaths is to fill in the inside of the wreath. So that it is equal to what you're putting on the outside. It'll help it to look balanced that way. So whenever I add an element to the outside, I try to go and also add something to the inside. And I'm just gonna keep adding these little Christmas tree like branches here all around. And I've jumped ahead a little bit, and at this point we have most of our little Christmas tree like branches filled in. I'm just going to add a couple of those little like cedar branches as well. So I'm going to go in right here, and I'm just going to add a little bit of that cedar type leaf, and I'm using a sap green here, so it's a little bit brighter of a green than the other color that we had used for the Christmas tree type branches. And I'm just gonna add a couple of those little cedar branches here and there. And what makes those different, it's just like a little cluster of 2 or 3 of little pine needles, like kind of all together in a cluster. And I'm gonna build one out here. And I think for this one, I didn't even bother to go in with my sepia branch. I just made it all the same color. And then if I decide later that I want a little more definition between the branch and the little pine needle, then I'll just go in and fill that in after the fact. So I'm just going to finish up with this little cluster of 3 and then look around to see what area needs to be filled in next. Then I'm going to go right above here. And we'll add in a little branch with some of those little wishbone extensions coming out of it. And we'll add more of those little like cedar type twigs here. And as I'm going around, I'm just, I'm not really thinking too much about it. I'm just going from area to area and I'm just filling in. So it's like wherever you think your wreath looks like it looks a little bare or a little bit unbalanced, then you just kind of go in and add another element. And you just keep going until the wreath is filled or until you feel like it's done. You'll kind of, when you get there, you'll know. And this is a really nice meditative project to do. You're just like adding these really simple shapes in this, circular motion over and over and over again. And it just keeps getting fuller and fuller and more beautiful as you go along. And you don't really have to do much thinking while you're working through one of these. Another cool thing about these wreaths, it can take 5 minutes, it can take an hour. It just depends on, you know, what you want to put into it, how detailed you want it to be. And now I'm going to add some of those little fern shapes that we learned how to draw. This was the last little element that we did. I'm using some perylene green for this. And I'm just starting with my little teardrop shaped leaf at the top and then little teardrop shaped leaves on either side. And I'm just kind of adding it in wherever it looks like my wreath needs a little bit of a filler. So this little spot here looked a little bit bare, so I'm going to go in and add some of my little perylene green ferns. And if the color looks a little too dark, you can just pick it up really easily with a paper towel and then just go back in and lay your color back down. And then maybe we'll put a little fern over here on this side as well. And another trick with these wreaths is to use different shades. So whenever I add a new element, I try to give it a new color. So our ferns are this like deep dark green. We have like the turquoise green magnolia leaves. We have our bright green cedar leaves. We have our yellow gold like Christmas tree branches. I'll just call it that. So we've got, even though we're pretty much in the green and blue family, we've got lots of different shades that are complementary to each other and just look pretty and will help the image to pop a little bit. It also helps whoever is looking at the wreath to tell that if you distinguish the different shapes with different colors, then it sort of brings their attention to the idea that there is a different type of little element in here. It's not just the shape that's different, but it's also the color. And now I think we're getting close to being done, but I'm just going to add a couple more little filler pieces of foliage here. So another one of those little ferns, and sometimes you might have to put the little element behind another element, which is not a big deal. You're just, you know, I'm just careful here, like where I'm going around the magnolia leaf, just not to cover over it, because I want the magnolia leaf to appear like it's in the front. Now I'm gonna add in another little fern here. And then maybe, let's see what we put here. Maybe we'll add another little fern here. Looks like this little area needed to be broken up a little bit. And then maybe another like pine needle shape here. Maybe another one right behind. And then this little guy is going to go behind our little magnolia leaf there. And our wreath is getting more and more full by the moment. We're just going to add a few more little elements to close it off. And now we'll also, I thought another nice thing to do would be to add like a little bit of a different shade to some of these magnolia leaves. So I'm just dropping in a little bit of turquoise and then blending it out with some clear water. I'm just going to do that on some of the leaves. And again, it's just to add another little element of interest to our project. And here we have it. So here is our first wreath. So this is our traditional clean line wreath. You can put any sentiment that you want there and turn it into a Christmas card, nice and easy. And now we're going to get a little loose. So I drew my little circle on again. It just so happens that the center of painter's tape is the perfect size that I need. I'm going to add some clear water around the edges of our circle, and I'm making sure it's all kind of a raggedy, like a raggedy pattern. And I'm going on the inside and the outside of that line because this is going to be the area that our wreath covers. I'm going to take some Cascade green and just start dropping it into different parts. And now I'm going to add some nickel azo yellow and do the same, just drop it in different spots. This is going to be our half blurred wreath. Now I'm going to take some blue. I think this is cobalt blue. Thought it would be fun since it's not a color you normally associate with wreaths, so I thought it could add some interest. A little bit of like a burnt sienna color there, a little brown. And that'll be like the areas where we put our pine cones later. And now I'm just going to drop in some more cascade green, a little bit more concentrated color. And it's starting to look like a wreath, right? It's like a blurry wreath, but we're starting to get the sense that this is going to be a wreath. And we've got this beautiful shape that the colors just bled into because of that clear water that we laid down to start. I'm just going to wipe up some of the excess water around the edges, being careful not to pick up too much. I don't want to pick the color up with me. I just want my paper to dry a little bit. And I'll take my heat gun. You could wait, but I use my heat gun for this. And now we can start applying our next layer. So I'm going to start with a pine cone. So we're doing that pine cone shape, the little upside down triangles that get a little bit more craggly the farther down you get towards the end of the pine cone. And I'm using sepia here. And the method that I'm going to do, we're going to have the right side of the wreath that's going to look like it's nice and in focus. And then we're going to have this left side that's kind of blurry. So for the pine cone on the left, I'm using a more watery solution of that sepia. And I'm just going to let that sit for a moment. Going to add some more of the concentrated sepia to make a pine cone on the right. So anything on the right is going to be clear and in focus. Anything on the left is going to be real blurry and just like a loose watercolor look. So I'm going to pick up some of that excess water because again, I just want it to be blurry looking. And now we'll work on the foliage on the left side of our wreath. And this is the same exact technique for the right side of the wreath, that we used for that first wreath that we've done here. So I'm just gonna follow along the edges of the hand-drawn circle and just have my branches come out extending on a curve, making a whole bunch of nice wishbone type shapes. And then as I get closer to the left side, which is our blurry side, I'm gonna have the colors just become a little bit lighter and a little bit blurred, because again, anything on that left side, it's going to end up looking pretty blurred and we're not going to add that much detail to it. So now I'm just blurring out those lines that I added to the left. And now let's see what we do next. I don't remember. Okay. Now we're going to draw in some little leaves. So these are like mini magnolia leaves, I guess, and I'm using some cascade green here. So we're going to use that same method of having either clusters of 2 or 3 leaves per branch. And I'm just going to fill those in the empty spots on the right side. And I'm leaving that little strip of white on the inside of the leaf just to give a little bit of interest and definition to the leaf. We'll add a couple more over here. Maybe one up top here. And as we get closer to that left side, we're going to get looser and more blurry. Another little leaf here. Maybe a couple more over here by our pine cone. And again, all of my leaves, they're all going counterclockwise. We'll put another little leaf behind the pine cone there. And now I'm going to take some really, really light color here. So it's really watered down, and I'm just going to add some of those same little leaves, and then maybe add a little bit with a lighter green and just kind of make a little bit of like a mushy mess, I guess. So the idea is that they're the same leaves, but they're just kind of blurred and blown out a little bit. So it's really just light color on the left. And now we'll add in some little Christmas tree like branches here. I'm just using a really, really light layer of, I think this might even be cascade green here. And the lighter that you make your little branches, it'll help to, make them look like they're behind, that they're kind of hidden by the flowers up front. I just thought that it helped with the whole overall just kind of blurry background that we have because of that wash that we had done to start. So whenever I get to that left side of the wreath, I'm using light colors or very watered down colors. Whenever I'm working on the right, I'm using more concentrated color. So I'm making, I guess they're kind of like a little bit still like pine needles, like a cross between pine needles and ferns here. This was actually the first wreath that I had done, so I hadn't mapped out all of the elements clearly in my mind at this point, but by the time I got to the wreath that we put together right before this one, I had my little basket of little elements that I could easily add into the wreath. So now we're going to add a couple of the ferns, a couple of the little pine needle shapes. Just filling in this little open area here. And then we'll add a second coat of paint, of some shading to these pine cones. So I'm just going on the lower part and adding a little bit of concentrated sepia color here and not really blending it in at all, just letting it be a contrast to the shade, so it just makes it look a little bit more dimensional, even though it's a pretty abstract shape, but we just want it to look a little more pine cone like, I guess. Gonna add some darker tones here and there, maybe a couple more branches here. Maybe a little twig here, a really, really light pine needle there. And then I'll just blend that in. And now we'll add some spatter. And I'm just spattering it with the colors that we've already used in the wreath. So we have that cascade green, the cobalt blue. I'm going to stay away from the red that's up in the corner there. And just kind of like brown and green and blue. And that's it. So here is our half blurred wreath. Here is another version using some more cool like turquoise shades. And here are all of the projects that we either made today or we learned the techniques to be able to make it ourselves on our own. So I would love to hear from you in the comments as to which of the versions you prefer. Do you like the clean lined wreath that we did in the first example, or do you prefer the loose and blurry version that we had done in the second sample? All right, thanks so much for watching, everyone. I hope you have a wonderful day, and I hope you have so much fun making these wreaths. Have a great day.